full cost of the Iraq War, now we know it's been estimated about $3 trillion, would cover all of the global investments in renewable power generation needed between now and 2030.
Hello, my name is Stanley Heller. Welcome to The Struggle. The Struggle is shown on over 30 cable stations from Vermont to New York City and in Washington, D.C. Our YouTube channel is Struggle Video Media. United States and Russia have made a bargain over Syria. The plan is for a ceasefire for a week and then joint military action. The U.S. demands that the forces that united temporarily to break the siege of Aleppo divide against themselves. Then Russia and the U.S. will bomb the group supposedly allied with Al-Qaeda. In theory, the UN will be allowed to deliver food aid, but no end to the sieges and no freedom for the prisoners in Assad's torture-to-death prisons. None of that is part of this bad deal. The day after the agreement, Assad forces bombed Idlib and killed nearly 100. A bit of good news. The white helmets are becoming more and more known, and the New York Times had a piece that they've been embraced by a group of Hollywood actors, stars, including Ben Affleck, Daniel Craig, Justin Timberlake, Vanessa Redgrave, and Alicia Keys. They support the drive to have the Syrian White Helmet Group win the Nobel Peace Prize. There was an article in Forbes magazine about former four-star General Stanley McChrystal. He once commanded all U.S. forces in Iraq and now is an instructor at Yale University. The piece in Forbes was all glowing about McChrystal and his ability to teach leadership. There's another view about him. This from journalist Jeremy Scahill. Scahill authored the books Blackwater and Dirty Wars. In 2013, Scahill was in New Haven on a very prestigious Yale grant, but he had the guts to harshly criticize Yale professor Stanley McChrystal.
General Stanley McChrystal, who some of you may be students of his, he's on this campus. When the Gardez massacre happened, and those pregnant women were killed, and then the soldiers came and dug the bullets out of their body and then lied up the chain of command, Stanley McChrystal was the head of ISAF at the time. He was the commander of all U.S. and international forces in Afghanistan. And I believe, if you're a student in this classroom, that you should stand up one day and ask Stanley McChrystal to answer for a multi-month cover-up of the killing of Traprock. I don't believe that these people should be allowed to go anywhere in public without being confronted with their actions when they were prosecuting these wars. Stanley McChrystal presided over Murder Incorporated in Iraq when he was the commander of the Joint Special Operations Command. He should not be allowed to give a single lecture at Yale without someone standing up and asking him about Camp Nama in Iraq, the secret prison that JSOC ran, where they would beat people with baseball bats, when they would torture them, when they would douse them with cold water and put them in front of air conditioners. He shouldn't be allowed on a campus like Yale to act as though he's a legitimate member of society when he was responsible for so many crimes against so many people. And I think it's utterly shameful that not a single faculty member at Yale said anything publicly when Stanley McChrystal arrived on this campus.
The solidarity for the Standing Rock, North Dakota protectors continues to swell. Well over 100 people rallied in Middletown, Connecticut, outside a TD Bank, which is a pipeline investor. Would you like to give your name?
My name is Katrina Harry.
And I believe you said in Navajo?
I am Navajo. I come from the Navajo Nation.
Which today is around in Arizona.
Navajo is located in Arizona, New Mexico, Colorado, and Utah.
And how do you feel about what's going on up in North Dakota?
I stand with my sisters and brothers in North Dakota and South Dakota because we need to save our water. And I am fighting with my daughters here for Mother Earth.
I am here to support the shutdown of the Dakota Access Pipeline taking place right now that is impeding on Indigenous rights. As you know, the construction of this pipeline has been done in tandem with the work of TD Bank, which is supplying the credit that is going to construct the pipeline. This pipeline endangers millions of people who would be affected in that indigenous lands, sovereign nations rather, would be impacted by the impact of fracking and the contamination of water that may result, as we have seen through numerous catastrophes, such as what has happened with Shell and BP and countless others.
Listen to my interview with Lakota Nation member Travis Harden by going to our website, thestruggle.org, and clicking on the YouTube button. You may remember my interview with Harden about his trips to Palestine. Now, Pat Hynes, who spoke at a meeting of the climate activist group 350 Connecticut. Haynes is a retired professor of urban environmental health and is on the board of the Traprock Peace Center. She spoke on the topic of war and warming.
This year, we have, at an exponential rate, the world is warming. And so we've hit 1.5 degrees centigrade a number of times. And at the same time, the Middle East is on fire. And there seems to be a new Cold War emerging. This is with Russia, possibly with China. This is the US and NATO, is what I mean. They're the ones who are beating the war drums, and if it happens, they will precipitate it. So times are really, really charged. And it seems precipitous, given reaching 1.5 degrees so often this year as we have, and that each year is heating at a faster rate than the year behind it. So I call it exponential. I guess someone would have to calculate that. And given that, you think about hope, and I make a distinction between hope and optimism. I am not optimistic. However, if you define hope as Václav Havel did, first president of Czechoslovakia, he said hope is the engaged heart actively seeking. In his case, he said truth. I would say peace. I would say climate justice. You put in whatever it is you're working for. And then you have hope. The other definition, or I would say description of hope that I read recently by a woman, Jane Hirschfeld, is that hope is the hardest love we carry. And I actually feel at this moment in time that that's very true. So with that, I want to do what I was asked to do, which is bring the issue of climate change and the issue of getting beyond war as a way to resolve conflict. Try to bring them together in the way that they are together, in the way that I think about them. First, I wanted to tell you that I put together last year a PowerPoint presentation, fairly lengthy, maybe 45, 50 minutes, called Renewables Are Ready. And in that presentation, my goal was to present state-of-the-art progress that has been made and the potential for renewables, and that is particularly wind, solar, of course with efficiency, conservation, and hydropower, to power the world. And not just electricity, which is what we're doing today. We do not have in the works substitutes for 30% of our energy use, which is the fuel for heavy trucks, planes, and cargo ships. And that actually is what transports in a world of NAFTA and possibly the Pacific Trade Agreement. I mean, this is what everything that we use, etc. Solar panels, wind turbines. We're shipping them here, and so we need that oil, that fuel, diesel, whatever it is, until we have a substitute. Our programs, federal, and then in this presentation I go through the political obstacles, starting with the executive branch and their Clean Power Plan and their sort of buffet of energy choices. So actually solar, wind, renewables come down to about 25% long term. This is our national policy. Then we have Congress, which will not let anything through, and essentially wants to hold up and stymie the Clean Power Plan. And then we have ALEC, I'm sure you're all familiar with it, the American Legal Exchange Commission, or whatever they are. Yeah, which are at work in all of our states, even Massachusetts. I know that there have been brakes put on very good initiatives because of the influence of ALEC on some politicians. So essentially, we have tremendous obstacles that Germany does not have, Denmark does not have, for all I know, China might not have, in time, in this country, and that is what is holding us back. So this is part of what Renewables Are Ready about. But I open it saying that climate change is an issue of peace, because there are looming resource wars. I mean, oil has been, we've had resource wars for decades on that, but also now with water scarcity and drought in about 168 countries, and arable land, lack of arable land, and the loss of arable land that's going on in as many countries. There will be, China has been buying up arable land in Africa, which should be used for Africans. So we're headed towards conflict as a result of resources. So climate change, which contributes, of course, to droughts, loss of arable land, is an issue of peace at its base as well. Studies have shown, and this was again a German research institute, has actually calculated that a quarter of the 25% of the factors that drove the conflict in Syria was climate change, and that was the million or so farmers who were no longer able to raise food because of drought, came to the cities. The country did not, the government did not take care of them, as our government is doing in part for New England, USDA, and also our state is, because we've had a severe drought, as I think you have had as well. They are getting aid. Not enough, I think, but they are getting aid, but they did not in Syria. And so they became part of, the rest of the restive population. And so the prediction is the same in Nigeria, but not such a large factor in the conflict. And so we can only expect that this will continue with resource wars. Climate change is an issue of public health. There are in this country 7,500 premature deaths each year as a result of fossil fuels. There are across the world 7 million deaths because of sort of premature deaths because of lung disease, complications, etc., heart, and as a result of fossil fuels. This does not account for the immense lung and heart burden. People don't die necessarily prematurely, but asthma, COPD, etc., that comes from the use of fossil fuels. And then again, it's an issue of public health: food scarcity, water shortage from drought, water contamination from floods with deluges. There's tremendous overflow if there is wastewater treatment, but a wastewater treatment plant's contaminating food and water. And the UN, one piece I read recently, said on an average displacement of more than 20 million people per year, and it's only going to grow as a result of the combination of conflict and climate change. So what we see with Syria is just the beginning, and that's the greatest refugee crisis since World War II, but this is the beginning. Climate change is an issue of inequality and injustice, as you know, but here's a very good quote. I heard this Kenyan ecologist on Democracy Now! During the Paris Climate Summit, and she said, regarding the state of the world and climate change, we are all on the Titanic, but only the rich have the lifeboats.
Have the what?
The lifeboats. So, captured in a nutshell. Who caused the problem, who suffers from it, and who can rescue themselves. The 10 worst climate disasters in 2015 happened in developing countries, and these are the countries that have not caused the problem. And just a note about fracking. In terms of injustice, besides itself being, what is it, methane? The worst meth habit is methane. That, think about where it's done. It's lower income, rural communities, Pennsylvania, West Virginia. It is Native American lands, as we know in North Dakota. And then in terms of where oil and gas is refined, a larger percentage is in urban communities of color. I think of LA, and I think also of Louisiana, where there have been tremendous Superfund sites in these communities. So fracking, from so many sort of aspects of it, is a tremendous climate injustice to people as well as the climate. And you're familiar with the ecological collapse. We're in the midst of the 6th extinction. Climate change is one piece of it. Loss of habitat is, of course, another piece. But the extinction rate is 100 to 1,000 times average of pre-20th century. So, I mean, from any perspective we come into this, it's a tremendously endangered planet and its inhabitants. The destruction of coral reefs, you're familiar with, first initially from the depletion of the ozone layer, and now from warming of waters, from climate change. There's tremendously rapid bleaching of corals going on. They do hold, coral reefs are the greatest diverse, the largest diverse ecosystem in the world. And commercial fisheries in time will collapse if the corals go, and they are rapidly dying off. And more marine species sort of begin their life there and then move out from there than any other ecosystem in the world. So it's hard to say which will be the tipping point first, you know, in terms of the loss of something critical for life to continue on Earth. And finally, climate change contributes in this country to the erosion of democracy. And I thought of a counterpart. Does it always have? Well, 65% of solar is owned in Germany, is owned by small cooperatives. So it need not continue to be a corporate monopoly as the corporations would like it to be. The state of Nevada, which had a very good state law regarding solar, installing solar on individual homes, small buildings, etc. And that law was killed because a group of corporations basically banded together to fight it. They only want corporate-based solar. I mean, huge solar fields, and that is who's doing our huge solar fields in the Southwest, California. California. They're doing PV fields. They're doing, there's another type of solar collector which heats a fluid, and the fluid then turns a turbine. And just like we do with nuclear and fossil fuels, those are being built, but those are largely corporate-based. So what they want to do is really cut out the individual homeowner, the small commerce, who could then go off the grid as soon as batteries are self-sufficient. However, I understand that I think there will be something on the ballot in Nevada in November, and they feel it's going to pass, which would give back people's individual rights. You don't charge. They were going to charge them each something like $100 a month. This is anyone who's installed solar. That even came up in Massachusetts, which is to raise to an unaffordable level what you would charge for an individual who has put out the money to put solar on their roofs. And these are all corporate-based and ALEC-based initiatives. So, with all of this, all these dimensions of climate change and the links in with public health, ecosystems, democracy, etc., it's so evident that climate change is a defining issue of our times. But so also is militarism, because of its immense polluting impact on the environment, including climate, but also because of its permanent harm to humans and the stability of societies. You think of Iraq as a broken country. It's not clear it will ever come together again and function. It's predicted this will happen in Syria, and it's happened in Libya. And so the instability that militarism, aside the number of people it kills, the instability that then spreads, and of course terrorism, it festers in these kinds of situations. So as I see it, militarism is the other defining issue of our time. And just from a perspective of climate change, a couple of interesting facts. First of all, is any of you familiar with Oil Change International? Do you read? They do great analysis. So this is just a couple of points that on which they did analysis and a couple of their summaries regarding the Iraq War, so that we understand when we're at war, the immense impact, the immense amount of fossil fuel use and the immense impact on climate change. And also, war sucks all the money out of other aspects of government. And so what is spent on war is not spent on climate change, just as an example. The projected full cost of the Iraq War, now we know it's been estimated about $3 trillion, would cover all of the global investments in renewable power generation needed between now and 2030. What a trade-off. Between 4 years of the war, 2003 to 2007, the Iraq War generated more carbon dioxide equivalent each year of the war than 139 countries put together for each of those years. They also said rebuilding everything destroyed in Iraq would be rebuilt of cement. And cement is one of the most energy-intensive industries. This is fossil fuel energy-intensive industries. I wish we did rebuild Iraq, which has happened after World War II with Germany and Japan, and we don't rebuild anymore what we destroyed. Vietnam, Iraq, certainly not Syria, certainly not Libya. And then by 2008, the Bush administration had spent 97 times more on the military than on climate change. So you see the link. What you give to military, you take from climate change work. And then as a presidential candidate, Obama pledged to spend $150 billion over 10 years. So what would that be? It would be $15 billion a year on green energy and infrastructure, but that was less than the U.S. was spending in 1 year in the war in Iraq. So, again, these trade-offs that are disastrous. Has anyone seen, read, or heard of Barry Sanders? It's called The Green Zone, The Environmental Costs of Militarism. So he did what has not ever been done before. He tried to figure out the contribution of the Department of Defense and the Pentagon to climate change. And with great difficulty in getting information in some of the most kind of covered up sources possible, he has estimated that the U.S. military contributes about 5% of climate change, global warming, of the U.S. contribution. However, let me just put it in context. That's 1.5 million people, the military. Let's just say it's 2 million if you add in sort of the functionaries and the DOD, et cetera. 2 million people contributing 5% of climate change. This is our military. And so 2 million people are about 0.0002, so 2 10,000s or 2 100,000s of our population is essentially contributing 5% of emissions to climate change. He says, however, or someone else says, however, jet fuel actually contributes much more per gallon of fuel used, maybe 3 times as many CO2 emissions per gallon. So this is an underestimate. And it's an underestimate for another reason, which I will get to. Underestimate of how much military and conflict contributes to climate change. I'll finish with 2 golden rules, which I think is what we need. The first being the one we're familiar with, all the great religions, humanism, etc. Love thy neighbor. Nobody ever says quite as thyself, but that's what implied. That's a lot of love. And the second being, love thy nature as thyself. And we cannot do one without the other. I mean, we need both, as you can see from the 2 great crises of our time.
That's our program for today. See you next week at this time. I'm Stanley Heller, and this is The Struggle.